The first thing Drake Howell remembered was the color of the sky, not the day his world burned. That came later, in smoke and screaming. Before that, it was the sky over the Western Tropics. It was never just blue. It was molten glass and liquid fire, 1,000 shifting shades between dawn's soft blush and dusk's burning gold. Clouds drifted like lazy ships, their undersides painted rose and tangerine. Gulls wheeled beneath them, cutting white arcs that melted into the horizon. Below, the ocean stretched out in a calm, glittering sprawl, as if the whole world had been poured from the same blue-green bottle. It had been born under that sky, on an island so small it wore the sea like a crown. A crescent of white sand cupped a lagoon clear enough to see the shadows of fish sliding over the coral beds. Emerald hills rose behind it, smooth and soft, dotted with fruit trees that bowed low with their own generosity. Plumes of hibiscus and star-bright blossoms spilled from cracks in the rock, the air heavy with the perfume of salt, flowers, and ripe citrus. The island had a name, once, a soft, lilting Etruscan word, but everyone simply called it Emberfall. To Drake, it was just home. He learned to walk on the deck of the Seraphine, his father's ship, learned to speak in the pause between waves. His earliest memories were splinters of brightness, bare feet slapping warm planks, his mother's laugh carried on the wind, the creak of rigging singing him to sleep. At 6, he could tie knots blindfolded. At 7, he could tell you which way the wind would turn just by how it tasted. At 8, his mother guided his small fingers across star maps, inked in midnight blue and silver. "The sky is a sea, too," she'd murmur, candlelight soft on her copper-brown skin. "The stars are islands. If you can read one sea, you can read them all." "What about Nexu?" he'd ask once, tracing the ink lines that marked trade routes between Teletoon and Eldoria, between his tiny haven and the continent of Midgardum far to the east. His mother's eyes had softened. "Nexu is the current beneath it all," she'd said. "It's the breath the world takes. But we are not like the Fae of Midgardum, little tide. We're just humans. We borrow the sea. We don't command it." Drake believed her. He didn't need blazing spells or crackling lightning in his veins. He had the sea. He had the Seraphine. He had his parents and the small crew who loved him like a mascot, a good luck charm, who refused to stay in the galley when there was sky to climb. He remembered the way his father, broad-shouldered, sun-browned, beard shot with threads of silver, would stand at the helm with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on Drake's shoulder. "Feel that?" his father would say as the sails billowed overhead and the ship leaned into the wind. "Don't listen just with your ears, boy. Listen with your bones. The sea talks through them." Drake would close his eyes and try. He felt the pull of the current, the push of the wind, the way the hull vibrated when they sliced through swells, the ragged edge of a coming storm, distant but growing. It thrilled him, made his heart hammer like a drum. "Good," his father would rumble. "The sea likes you. Maybe more than it likes me." His mother would snort from her perch on the rail, her dark hair braided and looped atop her head. "The sea pities you, Roderick. It hasn't the heart to drown you for being a fool." They lived like that, laughing between ports, anchored in the comfort of routine. Dawn in some new harbor in the Western Tropics, Teletoon's terrace cliffs, Arcanum's marsh and mist-wreathed palms, the bustling docks of Celestia. Midday at sea with the sails fat and the sun high. Sunset on the deck with a small fire in a brazier, and his mother's sweet, low voice spinning stories of sea serpents and zodiacs and cities of glass beneath the waves. Peace, it turned out, had a sound. It was the crackle of the brazier, the soft slap of water on the hull, the steady murmur of his parents' voices, overlapping like tides. Drake thought it would last forever. He was 12 when he learned how quickly forever could burn. The night the sea burned. The day began like 100 others. Seraphine was fat with trade, crates of dried fruit from Methosia, bolts of dyed silk from the markets of Portugal, casks of sweet wine from some sun-baked vineyard in Flagler Coast. The crew moved in easy rhythm, hands confident, steps sure. Drake loved these days. Ship heavy with promise, wind at their backs, a warm hush over the water. He perched at the prow, one bare foot hooked over the rail, fingers curled on the sun-warmed wood. Dolphins danced below, racing the ship's shadow. They broke the surface in gleaming arcs, sides flashing silver and blue. "Show-offs," Drake muttered fondly. The sky was clear, The wind tasted of salt and figs. His mother hummed at the stern, tuning a small string lute one of the traders from Eldoria had gifted her. His father was speaking low with First Mate Harrow, going over charts of their planned loop through the Western Tropics. Nothing felt wrong. That was the cruelest part, he'd think later, that there was no omen, no shiver, no whisper, just a normal, perfect day. Then Drake smelled smoke. He frowned and sniffed, a tiny, puzzled wrinkle between his brows. It wasn't the sharp, clean scent of the brazier or galley stove. This was heavier, oily, wrong. He turned his head, nose tracing the air. The wind was wrong, too, a strange pressure crawling against his skin. "Captain," Arrow called quietly from the helm. "See that?" Drake followed his pointing hand. At first, he saw nothing, just the dull smear of approaching twilight. The sea turned to tarnished silver by the slipping sun. Then, like a wound opening in the horizon, he saw it. Smoke. A dark, coiling pillar. Another ship? His father narrowed his eyes, then swore under his breath. Not smoke above a ship, smoke from a ship. "Get Drake below," his mother said at once, loot forgotten as she strode to him. "Now," Drake bristled. "I can." A bell rang in 3 urgent, shattering peals. The crew tensed as one. "Sails on the starboard bow," a sailor shouted from the masthead. "Closing fast." Drake glanced to starboard, and his mouth went dry. The ship cutting through the dusk toward them was wrong. Most tropic vessels were bright, painted hulls, fluttering pennants, sails dyed in cheerful dyes. This one was a dark smear, its black-slashed sails drinking in the sunset. The prow jutted forward like a blade, its figurehead a snarling beast whose features Drake couldn't parse, part wolf, part dragon, all hunger. Lanterns lined the railings, shutters half closed so their light burned in narrow, focused slits, predator eyes in the oncoming dark. "The dawn," Harrow whispered. "By all the divines." Drake had heard the stories. Everyone had. "They weren't pirates," the tales said. "Pirates stole. The dawn erased. They sailed under no kingdom's flag, answered to no guild, ignored all Nexu Council decrees. Their raids were not about coin. They targeted ships and ports that got in the way of some unseen design, carving a bloody pattern across the Western Tropics. No survivors when they wanted none. Some survivors when they wanted rumors. Drake had thought they were a story, like the sea serpents and glass cities. The way his father's knuckles whitened on the wheel told him otherwise. "Mother?" he whispered. Below she snapped, fingers biting into his shoulder. She was not humming now. There was no softness in her face, only sharpened focus. "Harrow, run up our flag of surrender. We've nothing they don't care," Harrow said hoarsely. His eyes never left that dark ship. "They don't take surrender. They'll brand us pirates." The dawn closed the last of the distance with horrifying speed, their hull knifed through the waves, throwing up spray that glowed blood orange in the failing light. Drake heard drums, a fast pounding rhythm that matched the spike of his heartbeat. Hooded figures lined their deck, silhouettes hard and still. "Mother," Drake's voice cracked. "We should run. We can't outrun that," his father said, quiet but firm. "Below. Now. Both of you. Whatever he meant to say was swallowed by the first cannon blast. The world convulsed. The shot tore through the Seraphine's midships, sending splinters of wood, crates, and a man Drake knew as Knoll spinning into the air. Fire spat from the wound, greedy and instant. The Seraphine shuddered, staggered, like a living thing taking a killing blow. Drake's ears rang. He stumbled, caught himself on the rail. The second volley came on the heels of the first, ripping along the deck. A mast groaned and cracked, rigging whipping as it toppled. Someone screamed. The air was suddenly thick with smoke, choking and hot. Flying embers landed in coils of rope in the hem of sails. Flames leapt, eager. "Drake." His mother seized his face between both hands, forcing his gaze to hers. Her eyes were wild, dark, but focused. "Listen to me. Do not come out, no matter what you hear. Do you understand?" He shook his head, tears building, chest heaving. "I can help. I can tie lines. I can..." "Drake." She pressed her forehead to his, just for a heartbeat. He smelled salt and lavender oil. "Our job is to keep you safe. That's the only map that matters." Another blast. The deck pitched sharply, sending them sliding. A wall of heat washed over them as something exploded near the stern. The Seraphine groaned, timber shrieking. Lyra, his father roared through the smoke. Take him. Harrow appeared out of the chaos, soot-streaked and bleeding from a cut at his temple. He grabbed Drake's arm. Below. Now. No. I'm not leaving. His mother's arms folded around him from behind, pinning his arms to his sides. She half dragged, half lifted him across the bucking deck. Drake kicked and thrashed, sobbing. He saw things in flashes. Harrow hauling a wounded man away from a growing pool of fire. His father at the helm, jaw clenched, trying to turn them broadside to present less of a target. Ropes whipping through the air like angry snakes. The dark shape of the Dawn ship looming closer alongside. Grappling hooks biting into the Seraphine's rails. They reached the hatch to the lower deck. Smoke poured from it, thick and black. Hold your breath, his mother rasped, voice raw. Trust me. The world became heat and shadow. The hold was a hellmouth. Crates smashed, barrels rolling, fire licking along spilled oil. The groan of tortured wood was a living thing. The ship was dying beneath his feet. They'll find me here, Drake gasped, coughing. His lungs burned. Mother, please. She didn't answer. Behind them, above them, the screams had changed. They had become raw, torn things. Then they were muffled, as if someone had slammed a door between Drake and the world. His mother found what she was looking for, a large shipping barrel, wedged between crates, half empty, its lid ajar. It smelled of salted fish and brine. Inside, she rasped, pushing him toward it. No. Panic spiked sharper than the smoke. No, I won't leave you. A cannon hit closer this time, a deafening, skull-shaking blast. The deck lurched. Drake flew forward, cracking his knee against a crate. Something heavy fell nearby with a crunch. His mother swore, the word ragged. Forgive me, she whispered. Before he could twist away, she shoved him into the barrel. He fell in a tangle of limbs, slamming against cold wood. The stink of fish and salt clawed at his throat. He tried to scramble up, but the lid came down, the world narrowing to a sliver of light before it, too, vanished. He slammed his fists against it. Mother! Her hands pressed flat against the wood of him. He felt the tremor in them. You listen to me, little tide, she said. Above the roar of fire and distant shouting, her voice came to him thin and fierce. You hold fast. Do you hear? The sea is not done with you. It will carry you like it carried us. You will not die here. I don't want the sea, he sobbed. I want you. There was a sound like rope snapping, like something huge giving way. Heat surged. Drake smelled pitch and burning canvas, felt the barrel jolt as the floor tilted sharper. His mother's voice caught, breaking on his name. I love you, she said. It was the simplest thing she had ever told him, and the hardest to hear. Remember the stars. The world went sideways. The deck split with a scream. Water rushed in, thunderous, icy roar. Drake's stomach lurched as the barrel flipped, rolled, slammed into something, then tore free. He felt weightlessness, then the brutal cold grip of the sea. He screamed, but water surged through the cracks, choking him. The world became spinning darkness, and the drum of his heart in his ears. Something, a falling beam, another piece of debris, struck the barrel hard. Wood cracked. The last thing Drake saw through a sliver of broken staves was fire on the water. A burning ship torn in two, and a dark silhouette against the flames, standing on the deck of the Dawn vessel, watching the Seraphine die. Then the sea took him. Driftwood boy. He woke to creaking. Soft, rhythmic, the groan of old wood shifting with the water. The air was thick with tar and salt and the faint sourness of stale sweat. Drake's throat felt flayed. His limbs were leaden. When he tried to move, pain flared, a deep, bone-deep ache, and his ribs protested. Easy there, a voice said, close and unfamiliar. Low, rough, threaded with amusement. You thrash like that. You'll open those stitches and bleed all over my clean deck. Drake blinked. Light stabbed his eyes, bright and merciless. He lay on a narrow cot in a cramped cabin, the ceiling so low he could touch it if he lifted a hand. A small round porthole let in a shard of Western Tropics sun. He squinted past it, heart leaping. Ocean, endless and blue. No flaming wreck, no black-sailed predator, just waves and survival. He sat up too fast. Pain lashed through his side and he choked on a gasp. A pair of hands, calloused, strong, pushed gently but firmly on his shoulders. "Down, pup," the voice said. "You're not that urgent." The man came into focus. He was thick-shouldered and barrel-chested, with a bald head polished by sun and a beard braided into 3 neat plaits. His left eye was clouded, the milky color of old glass. The right was sharp and assessing, the blue of deep water. Scars crossed his forearms and knuckles like old riverbeds. "Who?" Drake rasped. His lips were cracked, tongue thick. "Name's Garen," the man said. "Captain of the Crescent Wraith." He said it like it meant something. Maybe it did. To Drake, it was just another unknown in a world that had tipped sideways. "My ship," Drake whispered. The word scraped him raw. "The Seraphine. My parents." The memory hit like a cannon. Smoke. Fire. His mother's hands. His father's shout. The dark ship. The dawn. Drake shuddered, squeezing his eyes shut. He swallowed hard against the burn behind them, against the way his chest clenched until breathing hurt. Garen watched him, in silence for a long moment. "We found you 3 days ago," he said finally, not unkind. "Drifting on a broken spar. Lucky you hadn't gone under yet. Luckier still the sharks hadn't found you first." 3 days. Time had slipped past him like current while he'd floated between life and death. "How old are you, pup?" Garen asked. 12, Drake muttered. Garen scratched his beard. "You remember what happened?" The question was simple. It felt like a knife. Drake opened his mouth, closed it again. He could speak of it, could paint it with words, the sound of the hull splitting, the way his mother's voice had cracked, the fire, the dark, watching figure on the enemy's deck. But saying it would make it real in a way he wasn't ready for. His throat worked. No, he lied. Garen's good eye narrowed slightly, but he did not push. "Well, here's what I know," the captain said instead, leaning back on the little stool. "We were running a quiet line between Hearth and the mainland when we saw a column of smoke that could have signaled the end of the world. By the time we got close, there was nothing left but char and wreckage. Bodies, too." His mouth flattened. "We trawled for any we could pull out. Most were beyond help." Drake stared at his hands. Bruised, cut, young. "We found you," Garen went on, voice gentler. "Alive, barely. You've been on my ship since." "Why?" Drake's voice was dull. "'Cause I'm not in the habit of leaving children to drown," Garen said dryly. "Even ones who glare at me like I ran down their favorite kitten. That, and you had this." He reached to a small table and picked up an object Drake hadn't noticed. A chain, silver, tarnished, the links familiar to his bones. At the end of it hung a small disc of beaten copper, the edges worn smooth by years of touch, his mother's charm, a stylized wave carved into the metal, a star nestled in its curl. Drake's fingers twitched toward it before he could stop them. Garen's eye caught the movement. He held the charm out. Drake's hands shook as he took it. The metal was warm from Garen's palm, cool where it touched his skin. He pictured his mother at her little work table in the cabin, tongue caught between her teeth as she engraved the tiny star. "If you're ever lost," she'd said, hanging it around his neck on his 8th birthday, "look up. If the sea won't tell you where to go, the stars will." Drake closed his fist around it so tightly, the edges bit into his palm. "Thank you," he said. The words felt small. Garen grunted. "We'll be coming into harbor soon. Little island south of Celestia. Fishing village, nothing fancy. I'll put in a word for you with some folks there. They look after their own, even strays. Can I stay on the ship?" The question slipped out before Drake could swallow it. Garen blinked. "The ship? You want to take the sea again that quick?" Drake thought of the dawn's dark hull, of fire on water. Then he thought of the endless horizon, of the way the ship had always felt like home beneath his feet. His parents had danced across the sea. Drake did not know how to stand still on land. "Yes," he said. The word tasted like salt and ash. "I want to help. Work. Anything." Garen studied him for a long time. "Listen to me, boy," the captain said. "You're not ready. You can barely stand. You've got ghosts clinging to you like kelp. The sea will still be there when you've found your feet on land." His gaze softened, just a fraction. "You get a year. Learn to breathe again. Then if you still want the life, you come find a ship. Maybe mine, maybe not. But you walk onto that deck as a choice, not as an escape." Drake wanted to argue, to say that his choice had been ripped from him with the sound of splitting wood and his mother's last words, that the sea had taken everything, and the only way to survive it was to take something back. Instead, he swallowed around the lump in his throat and nodded. The sea had not asked him what he wanted, but someday he would ask something of it in return. Garen clapped him lightly on the shoulder. "Good lad. Rest. You'll need it." He pushed to his feet, the cabin creaking as his weight shifted. "Welcome to the world again, Drake Howell. It's uglier than you remember, but it's not done with you yet." The island they docked at had no name on any chart Drake had ever seen. It was as if the island was newly formed. It was half the size of Emberfall. The hills were harsher, the sand more gray than white. Weather-beaten shacks hugged the shore, their roofs patched with mismatched wood and tarred canvas. Nets hung from posts like molting skin. The villagers were sun-browned and wary-eyed, their hands roughened by rope and fish scale. They accepted him without questions, maybe because Garen vouched for him, maybe because they'd all lost something to the sea and knew grief when they saw it. An old woman named Lisa gave him a pallet in a corner of her hut, alongside 3 other storm orphans she'd collected over the years. A stooped man, missing 3 fingers on one hand, taught Drake to mend nets, his voice a low rumble filling the long silences. A girl with hair like tangled rope showed him where to find the sweetest wild fruit in the hills. They gave him bread, water, work, but not even the gentle lap of waves on the shore could quiet the storm that had rooted in his soul. He woke at night choking on smoke that wasn't there, heart pounding like cannons. He'd stumble outside, bare feet finding packed earth, and stare at the indifferent stars until his breathing steadied. Sometimes he fancied he saw the pattern of his mother's maps in them. Mostly, he saw only distance. The dawn became a black shape at the edge of every thought. While the villagers mended nets, he mended memories. It didn't help. He asked questions. The old men on the docks knew the name, the dawn, and spat when they said it. "Devils," one muttered over a chipped mug. They hit a caravan off Eldoria 2 months back, claimed them pirates and took every ship, then scuttled them all once they were done. "No traders will run that line now. Here they're working with some dark Nexu folk," another said, voice dropping to a whisper. "Warlocks and witches, ones the council wouldn't touch. That's why nobody can pin 'em. Always one step ahead. Today's dawn is a far cry from the one Celine Maris helped build. It's even worse than the one that started the attack on Dokasnua in 261 PC. Saw their flag once, a third swore, black sun over black water. Dawn of the end, they say, dawn of the new world. Bunch of pompous bastards, if you ask me." Drake listened. He said nothing. He learned the rhythm of the village, the push and pull of the tides, the feel of sand under his feet instead of planks. He waited. At 15, Drake Howell stole his first ship. It wasn't much of a ship, a coastal cutter, mostly woodworm and stubbornness, used by the village to run fish to neighboring islands. She had 1 mast, shabby sails patched so many times they looked more thread than cloth, and a hull that groaned like an old man in winter. But she floated, and she had a name burned into her stern in faded paint, the Gannet. Drake took her in the dead of night when even the restless sea seemed to doze. He'd grown taller in 3 years, all elbows and sharp angles, the softness burned out of him. His hair had darkened beneath the relentless sun, salt bleached at the tips. His eyes, once bright, had cooled to flint. He knew every board of the dock, every squeak it made at different weights. He slipped over it barefoot, breath held, fingers sure on the mooring lines. He'd spent a year honoring Garen's warning, another year training, another silently watching every ship that came and went, memorizing sails, crew routines, the way captains moved. Now he moved like one. The Gannet drifted free with a soft shush of rope. He unfurled her patched sail, heart hammering at every creak. The wind caught, hesitant at first, then with more confidence. The cutter slid from the harbor like a shadow, the village fading behind him. He half expected someone to shout, for Lisa to appear on the dock, hair braided under her headscarf, smacking him upside the head with a ladle and demanding he come back. For Garen's ship to materialize from the dark and cut him off. No one came. The island shrank, shacks becoming smudges, people ghosts. Drake exhaled. He wasn't alone for long. They came out of the darkness as if the sea itself had spat them up, Forms he recognized before their faces were fully visible. The girl with rope hair, the stooped man missing fingers, two of Lisa's other storm orphans, now gangly nearly men, a pair of brothers from the eastern shacks who'd always had too much anger and not enough direction. They'd been waiting for him, maybe for years. "You think you're leaving without us?" Rope-haired Marla demanded, hands on her hips as she hopped from a small skiff onto the gannet's deck. "Idiot," Drake gaped at them. "What are you doing?" "Stealing this ship," replied the older of the brothers, dark-haired Jace, as if it were obvious. "Same as you. Thought you'd need help." The stooped man turned, grunted as he secured the skiff's line. "Can't let a boy who still falls off dock ladders try to sail alone." "I don't fall," Drake protested. "You did, last week," Marla grinned, teeth flashing in the moonlight. "Nearly took half the net with you." He should send them back. He knew that, deep down. What he was planning wasn't a fishing trip. It wasn't a harmless bit of rebellion a beating and a lecture could fix. He was stepping into something darker, something that had been brewing in his marrow since the night the Seraphine burned. But when he looked at them, at Marla's stubborn chin, at Jace's clenched jaw, at the way Turn's gaze flicked always toward the horizon where raiders had once taken his daughter off another village, he saw his own storm reflected back at him. The dawn wasn't a story to them either. "We're not coming back," Drake said quietly. Marla's grin softened. "We know." Silence stretched between them, filled with the creak of the mast and the slap of small waves against the hull. "Fine," Drake said. He looked at the sea, at the faint outline of clouds on the horizon. His heart pounded, equal parts fear and exhilaration. "Then we do this properly." He straightened. "Welcome aboard." It was as informal an oath as any. They rechristened the Gannet 3 weeks later, after patching her hull, trading some pilfered fish for better sailcloth, and jerry-rigging a second small mast from salvaged lumber. "Decent little thing," Turn grunted, patting the rail as if it were a sleeping dog. "She needs a new name." Marla spread a patched chart on a crate, squinting at the trade lines between the islands. "Something that'll make those Dawn bastards piss themselves when they hear it." Drake stared out over the Western Tropics, the wind tugging at his sleeves. The horizon was a clean line, sharp as a blade. "The Black Gale," he said. Jace snorted. "Bit dramatic." "Good," Marla said at once, lips curling. "That's the point." They painted the words in bold black strokes along the stern. Drake's chest tightened as he watched the letters take shape. Rough, uneven, but real. The Black Gale. The boy who had drifted half drowned amidst the wreckage of his life had been powerless. The young man who now stood at the helm of a stolen ship was not. They hunted small at first, not Dawn ships. Drake didn't have the reach for that yet, but traders who extorted smaller villages, local raiders who took more than they needed, smugglers who dealt in living cargo. They struck fast, in and out before their targets understood that the patched sails on the horizon meant trouble. Drake was relentless. He'd been born to the sea, that much had always been true. Now he turned that birthright into a weapon. He read currents like sentences, winds like whispered warnings. He could predict a storm's turn by how the air tasted at dawn. He trained his crew the way his father trained him, only harder, sharper. He hammered them with drills until they could climb rigging blindfolded, until they could load and fire seas ballistae without barking a single order, until they moved as one, a living thing with Drake as its spine. Word spread. A patched sail phantom they called the Black Gale in the taverns of Toon, a storm popping up where no storm had been, capsizing cruelty and vanishing into dawn. They took gold when they needed it, supplies when the Black Gale's stores ran low. But Drake's true treasure was information. He listened in every port, ears tuned for one name, the Dawn. He heard snatches, a convoy ambushed near the reefs north of Crystal Helm, a village on Talam burned to the ground, a rumor that the Dawn had a stronghold somewhere in the Western Tropics, carved into the side of a nameless volcanic isle where Nexu-warped storms stitched the sky. Drake gathered every scrap and wove them into a map, not on parchment, but in his mind. His vengeance took shape. By 17, the Black Gale was no longer a scrappy stolen cutter. She'd grown with them, rebuilt and refitted after every raid, every battle. Her hull was sleek now, reinforced with iron bands cleverly hidden beneath dark-stained planks. Her masts were taller, her sails a deep storm gray. Ballistae lined her sides, their bolts engraved with Marla's crude skulls. His crew had grown too. No longer just a handful of orphans and the village misfit. Now they were runaways from conscripted navies, former Dawn press gangs who had deserted and run, a handful of Fey exiles from the countries of Midgardum. Some who knew how to channel Nexu into wind-sharpening wards and hull-strengthening sigils. They didn't follow him for gold alone. They followed the storm in his eyes. Under Drake's iron will, they carved a name into the Western Tropics Sea, the Black Gale, the Reaver of Dawn. He hunted dawn ships like a wolf stalks deer, silent, patient, without mercy. A chain called vengeance. Rage burns bright. It also hollows. Drake didn't notice at first. Each dawn vessel they fell on felt righteous. He watched their black sun flags tremble, then sink beneath the waves. He listened to the crack of burning masts and thought of the Seraphine, of his mother's last words. Each victory was a stone laid on the road to that night. He did not see the toll behind him, until the day he nearly killed them all. It was off the jagged rocks of Solstice Isle, 3 days' sail west of Tailatoon. The sea there was treacherous even in clear weather, all hidden shoals and snarling coral teeth. The wind tended to shift without warning, funneled between the reef's black spires. It was the last place any sane captain would pick to fight. Drake was not feeling particularly sane. "They're alone," he said, staring through the spyglass. The Dawn frigate cut through the water ahead of them, black-sailed and sleek. "No escort. We have surprise. We can take them." Turned squinted at the horizon. Clouds were massing in thick dark sheets, the line between sea and sky blurring. The wind had a restless, too-eager edge. "Storm's coming," he warned. "Bad one." "Good," Drake said. "It'll cover us." Marla made a low sound. "And drown us if we're not careful. You can dance a deck in the dark better than anyone," Drake said. "We've seen you." "This isn't a tavern floor," she snapped. "It's Solstice Isle. You saw the charts. One mistake and we're kindling." "They won't expect us there," Drake insisted. The spyglass dug into his palm. "That shipment, it's not just goods. They've got prisoners, slaves. I heard it myself, if we let them go." "And if we all die on those rocks?" Jace asked quietly from the rail. "Those people die anyway. And so do we." The words should have hit like a bucket of cold water. Instead, they sparked something hot and ugly in Drake's chest. "You can stay behind if you're afraid." Silence slammed onto the deck. Jace's jaw clenched. Hurt flickered across Marla's face like a shadow. Turn's eyes narrowed, old and disappointed. Drake felt the weight of their gazes and shoved it aside. He wasn't afraid, not of a storm, not of some reef. The dawn had taken too much from him for him to flinch now. "We go in," he ordered. "We cut their hull to ribbons before they know we're there. We save who we can." No arguments. He turned away before he could see the looks they exchanged. The storm rolled in faster than even he predicted. By the time the Black Gale slid into Aris Reef's jagged maw, the sky had turned to a bruised, roiling ceiling. Lightning stitched silent forks between clouds. The wind screamed, seeming to come from everywhere at once, shoving the ship sideways. Waves reared up, white-capped and vicious. The reef's black spires lurked beneath them, invisible fangs. "There!" Marla shouted over the wind, pointing. The Dawn frigate struggled ahead of them, her black sails thrashing. "They're caught in it, too." A wave hit the Black Gale broadside, harder than any blow Drake had ever felt. The deck lurched. He grabbed the wheel, muscles straining as he fought to keep the ship's bow between two looming spires. "Trim the sails," Tern bellowed. "You'll rip the mast clean off if—" "We need the speed," Drake shouted back, salt stinging his eyes. "We lose it, we lose them." Another wave crashed over the bow, burying the deck in a wall of icy water. Someone screamed as they were swept off their feet. Ropes snapped. A barrel broke free and smashed into the rail. Drake gritted his teeth, knuckles white on the wheel. The Dawn ship was closer now, its hull clawing through the troughs. He could see men on its deck, clinging to rigging, their faces pale blurs. Lanterns swung wildly, casting nauseous arcs of light. Lightning exploded overhead. For a heartbeat, the whole world was white. In that stark flash, Drake saw everything too clearly. The reef's jagged teeth rising just beneath the Black Gale's port side. The angle of their approach, the terror in Marla's eyes as she clung to a rope inches from a churning void. We're not going to make that turn. He tried anyway. He hauled at the wheel, every muscle screaming. The Black Gale groaned, her hull protesting. The bow swung, but not sharply enough. The impact was a shriek of tortured wood and stone. The ship shuddered as her hull scraped along a submerged spur. The sound went through Drake's bones, all the way down to the memories rooted there. For a wild, whirling second, he was 12 again, hearing the Seraphine break. "Breach!" someone screamed. "She's taken on water." Waves hammered them again, shoving them farther onto the reef. Men were thrown across the deck. One went over the rail with a wordless cry, vanishing into the storm-lashed sea. "Drop anchor," Tern roared. "Now, we'll be dashed to splinters." Drake's vision tunneled. He saw, in a wash of rain and salt, the Dawn ship limping ahead. Even here, even now, his mind whispered, if we just push a little more. If we just... Drake! Marla's voice cut through the storm like a blade. Not Captain, not Reaver. His name. "Look at us." He did. For the first time since they'd entered the reef, he truly saw They clung to lines and rails with white-knuckled hands. Their faces were a patchwork of fear, fury, and something sharper, betrayal. Not because of the storm, not because of the dawn, because he had put them here. He had chosen his rage over their safety. Drake's breath punched out of him. The wheel rocked under his hands, slick with rain. "We're pulling off," he shouted hoarsely. "Drop anchor. Cut the forward lines, Marla. Get the bow around. Turn. See to that breach." There was a beat of stunned silence. Then his crew moved. Anchor chains roared out. Sails were slashed free to keep the masts from snapping. The Black Gale groaned as she shifted, scraping along the reef one last time, before it released her with a wrenching lurch. They didn't sink. Barely. By the time they limped out of Aris Reef's grasp, mast ragged, hull bleeding water, the Dawn frigate was gone, lost to the storm, or slipped away by some cruel twist of fate. Drake stood at the wounded helm, rain soaking him through, and tasted bile. He had risked everything, every life on his deck, to chase a shadow. Later, when the storm had passed and they'd staggered into a sheltered cove to assess the damage, his crew came to him, not to thank him for pulling back, to speak their minds. They didn't shout. Tern stood with his arms folded, missing fingers stark against weathered skin. Marla leaned against a crate, her jaw set. Jace's eyes were tired, rimmed red from bailing water for hours. "We signed on to fight the Dawn," Marla said. "We knew it'd be ugly. We knew we might die. We didn't sign on to be bait for your ghosts," Jace added quietly. Drake flinched. "You risked us," Tern said bluntly. "Not 'cause it was the right call, 'cause you couldn't stand to let them go." "That's not captaining, boy. That's drowning with your hands on the wheel." Anger rose, hot and reflexive. "They had prisoners," Drake snapped. "Slaves. We would have all been kindling on those rocks," Marla shot back. "You know that. You saw it. You just didn't care." The words sank into him like hooks. "I care," he said. "About them more than us?" she asked quietly. "The ones on this deck? Who've bled for you? Silence. Followed you?" The sea whispered at the edge of the cove, gentle and indifferent. Drake swallowed. His throat felt tight. "I won't make that mistake again." Marla's expression fractured for a heartbeat. She looked away. "Hope so," she murmured, "for all our sakes." But wounds like that aren't healed without a single slithered into their ranks. Nothing more than a shadow at first. A hesitation in the way someone followed an order. A question in the way they looked at him. Drake told himself he was imagining it. He kept hunting, kept pushing, until the day his own crew turned him over to the monsters he'd spent his life chasing. Stone and shadow. They sold him out at dusk. It was in a port he'd never planned to visit. A rocky, wind-scoured harbor on the far edge of the Western Tropics, where the cliffs rose sheer from the sea and gulls wheeled against a sky always bruised. He'd anchored there for the same reason he'd ignored Tern's warning about Solstice Isle. Information. A merchant from Tex had whispered of a Dawn contact who drank in the tavern under the cliff, where the rocks sweated mineral-rich water and the lamps burned with a sickly green flame. Drake had come ashore with a small contingent, leaving the rest of the crew aboard the Black Gale. If we can find where their stronghold is, he began. Marla's mouth tightened. We can tell the council. Let the Nexu guilds handle it. No, Drake said. We've been in their shadow for years. This ends with us. He should have listened to that hesitation. They went anyway. The tavern was a cave carved into the cliff's belly, its walls slick and glistening. The air smelled of damp stone, old ale, and something coppery underneath it all. Voices echoed oddly. As if the rock were listening, they never found the contact. They found chains instead. Men rose from the shadows between tables, not sailors, not villagers, dawn men. Drake recognized the way they moved, too smooth, too sure, the way predators walked. By the time Drake realized the trap, it had already sprung. Steel kissed his throat. Half his small shore party went down in the first exchange. Throats open or skulls caved. Nexu crackled along one enemy's arms, the skin turning stone hard where Marla's blade struck and bounced. Drake Howell, said a voice from the far end of the cave. He turned his head slightly, careful of the blade at his neck. The man who stepped into the lamplight was not what he expected. No snarling brute, no scarred monster. He was ordinary. Broad-shouldered, yes, salt silver in his dark hair. His eyes were the unremarkable brown of wet earth. His clothing was simple but fine, a long coat cut in the style of some Midgardum merchant family. Only the way he held himself, the easy ownership of the room, betrayed what he was. At his lapel, subtle but unmistakable, glimmered a small emblem, a black sun rising over black water. Looking forward to this, the man said. You've cost us ships, routes, men. He smiled. It did not reach his eyes. I'll give your crew this. They were loyal to you longer than I expected. Drake's heart stumbled. His throat felt suddenly dry. My crew? Most of them, the man said. Not all. People crack in different ways when you put pressure on them. Some get tired. He tilted his head. It hit Drake then, like a physical blow. They knew he'd be here, knew where he was going, knew how many men he'd brought. Someone had told them. No. Marla met his eyes across the cave, breathing hard, a cut bleeding down her cheek. There was fury in her stare, but beneath it, Drake saw something else, guilt. His stomach dropped. Marla, she flinched, he said. That told him everything. You don't understand, she choked. We just wanted Drake. You were going to get us all killed. They promised. You handed me to the dawn, he said, voice shaking. They burned my parents alive. And you handed me to them. Her lips trembled. Tears glimmered in the corners of her eyes, sparkling in lamplight. They said they'd let the Black Gale go. If they had you. Just you. No more hunting. No more. Enough, the Dawn man said, mild. He flicked his fingers. The blade pressed harder against Drake's throat. You've become problematic, Captain Howell, the Dawn man continued. We could kill you. It would be simpler. But you're a symbol, whether we like it or not. Symbols are useful. Chains clinked in the dim as more men emerged, bearing shackles. You're going to prison, the man said, somewhere deep, somewhere forgotten. We will break you there, slowly. When we bring you back into the light, you will be a warning, proof that the dawn is inevitable, that no storm lasts forever. Drake's wanted to lunge, to rip free, to carve through them all, even if it meant dying. But he thought of his crew, still on the Black Gale, of Marla's tear-bright eyes, of Turn's weary disappointment, of Jace's quiet anger. If he resisted and died here, the dawn would still go after them. If he lived, maybe he could still do something that mattered. He let the blade at his throat lead him forward. His wrists. Chains settled around his ankles. As they dragged him from the cave, he looked back one last time, at Marla standing frozen amidst the wreckage of overturned tables and spilled ale. Why? He asked. The word was soft. Because you stopped seeing us, she whispered. You only saw them. It was not the answer he wanted. It was the one he deserved. They took him where sunlight went to die. The prison was carved into the belly of a cliff on some nameless island, its rocks black and jagged, its waves perpetually furious. From the sea, it was nothing but sheer stone and snarling surf. The entrance lay hidden in a cleft only visible when the tide retreated, guarded by Nexu-marked wards that made the air hum. Inside, it was all shadow and iron, cells dug from rock, narrow corridors that twisted like a serpent's gut. Torches sputtered, their light thin and greasy. The smell was damp stone, rust. They threw Drake into a cell barely bigger than a ship's pantry. Iron bars, iron chains, a straw pallet that stank of previous occupants. A narrow slit near the ceiling let in a thread of gray light when the sun was at its highest. He counted the days by that thread. At first, it came only pain with questions. How many ships did he command? Where were his safe information? He answered with silence. They beat him for it. Fists, boots, a lash that kissed his back until it was flayed and oozing. A Nexu warped rod that burned cold instead of hot, leaving numb tracks that ached hours later. The dawn man from the cave came sometimes. Eyes, always that same unremarkable brown. You're stubborn, he said once, after Drake spent an hour chained to the wall, refusing to scream. Pointless, but stubborn. Drake spat blood at his boots. He learned to live in pieces. He separated pain from self, locked memories in boxes inside his mind. His mother's voice, his father's hand on the wheel, the way the sea had smelled on mornings out of Haven. He visited them when he needed to remember he was more than this cell. He found allies. It started with a cough in the dark. His cell had a neighbor, a shadowy space beyond the wall to his left where the stone was thinner. At night, when the guard's footsteps receded and the torches guttered low, he heard breathing. Soft rattle. A choked little laugh. Reaver, a voice rasped one night, low and amused. You're louder than the story said. Turned his head against the cold stone. Who are you? He whispered. Another ghost they forgot to bury, the voice replied. Name's Sarah. Used to run cargo out of Eldoria until I took a job that crossed the wrong men. Cloth rustled. You really Drake Howell? He hesitated. Then, yes, the devil himself, she murmured. They say you eat dawn men for breakfast and drink fire for supper. He huffed a laugh, surprised at the sound of it in his own chest. They're wrong. They're men. Fire doesn't stay lit in a storm. Sarah chuckled, then coughed, the sound echoing. Not yet, storm ran out, huh? Quiet, but sure. They think I'll break. Everyone does, she said. Eventually, a pause, some bend instead. He lay in the dark and thought could still be sharp. The prison was a routine of cruelty and small mercies. A guard who kicked him less than the others when he fell. A chunk of bread slipped under the bars by a young warden, whose hands shook. A word from Sarah through the wall when his thoughts turned too dark. You're not dead, she'd remind him. As long as that's true, you're still a problem for them. He began to watch, to listen, to count the number of steps between his cell and the interrogation chamber, to mark which guards' keys jingled differently, to note when torches burned low and were replaced, when shifts changed, every lash lazy on which nights, every bruise that bloomed, every insult thrown, became another notch in his mind's map of this place. He sharpened, not shatter. Months bled into a year, maybe more. Time in the dark is slippery. Then, one night, the rock itself shifted. The prison that fell in a night. It started with a vibration. Drake lay on his straw pallet, breath shallow, counting the patterns of torchlight in the corridor beyond his bars. Somewhere down the hall, a prisoner sobbed softly in their sleep. The air was thick and stale. Then, the stone beneath him quivered, just a fraction, as if something far below had stirred in its sleep. Drake sat up. He pressed his palm to the floor. The vibration came again, slightly stronger. A deep, resounding boom traveled up through the rock and into his bones. Did you feel that? He whispered, pressing his cheek to the wall. Sarah's answer was immediate. Hard not to. That wasn't thunder. Too deep. Another boom. This one accompanied by a faint, far-off roar. The sea, pounding somewhere it wasn't meant to reach. Drake's heart began to race. He heard shouts in the corridor, the clatter of keys, boots pounding, a bell ringing somewhere above, sharp and frantic. Something's wrong, Sarah breathed. Something's... Her voice cut off as the whole prison shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. The torchlight flickered wildly, then steadied, then flickered again. A distant scream rose, high, thin, stone groaned around them like a wounded thing. The sea has a way of reclaiming what men carve out of it. The next wave hit harder. Drake heard it this time, even through yards of rock. An immense, crashing impact, followed by a grinding, tearing sound. More screams. The unmistakable roar of water rushing into spaces that had once been dry. "Breach!" someone shouted above. "The lower corridors are..." His words vanished in a wet, choking gurgle. Chaos bloomed. Guards ran, some toward the sound, others away. Keys jingled in panicked, disorganized patterns. Somewhere, a heavy door slammed. Somewhere else, it failed. He had no plan. Drake moved. Just instinct and 100 nights' worth of observation. He went to the bars and wrapped his chained hands around them. Iron bit into his skin. "Sarah," he hissed. "Listen." He waited, muscles coiled. There, the distinct jangle of keys getting closer. Heavy footfalls, the rhythm rapid and uneven. A guard running, then slowing as he neared Drake's cell, breath harsh. "What's happening?" Drake demanded. The guard hesitated. His face was pale, sweat cutting rivers through the grime. "The sea," he gasped. A God's damned wave came out of nowhere, smashed half the northern wall. Another tremor shook the rock. Somewhere down the hall, stone cracked with a sound like a snapped mast. Drake pressed closer. "If this place goes under, you drown with us." The guard's throat bobbed. "You've got keys?" Drake pushed. "Open cells. The others will help you. We get out together or we all die here. Your choice." Fear warred with training in the man's eyes. He imagined the man had joined the Dawn for coin, not conviction. Most did. This place had been a posting, a paycheck, not a cause. Another boom, this one closer. The torch in the corridor guttered, then flared as a draft of damp air swept through. Water was coming. "Please," Drake added, forcing the word past his pride. "No one has to know you helped. But if you run now, alone, the sea will take you." Something in that broke the man. He fumbled with his keys, cursing under his breath, and jammed one into Drake's lock. The mechanism stuck. The guard swore, jiggled, and then, miracle, the lock clicked. The door swung inward with a whining protest. Drake stepped out of his cell for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. The corridor seemed too wide, too bright, even in flickering torchlight. He could feel the prison's bones shaking around him, the air vibrating with the approaching roar. "The others," he said. "Open them." The guard stared at him, as if waking from a trance. "They'll kill me," he whispered. "If they live." "They won't," Drake said. "And if we don't move, none of us will heartbeat longer." Then he ran down the corridor, keys jangling, flinging doors open as he went. Prisoners spilled out, some staggering, some with eyes already wild and ready to leap for the guard. Drake stepped between the man and one such lunge. "Not him," he snapped. "He's your way out." The prisoner, gaunt, hair hanging in lank ropes, snarled, but backed off. "Sarah," Drake called, hurrying to the wall they'd whispered through so many nights. "Your door, already open," she said from his right. He turned. She was thinner than he'd imagined, her hair a tangled crop mess, skin pale beneath a layer of grime. But her eyes were bright, burning. She held 3 links of a broken chain in one hand, like a weapon. "You get uglier every time I imagine you," she rasped. "But I'll take it." Water surged around the far corner, black and churning, swallowing the torch there with a hiss. The sound was deafening. "Up," Drake shouted. "We have to go up." They ran. Up cramped stairwells, past cells now half flooded, faces pressed to bars, hands reaching. "The guard, Ren," he shouted over his shoulder when Sarah asked his name, unlocked as many doors as he could as they fled, until the keys slipped from his shaking fingers and vanished into roiling seawater. The prison was dying. Whole portions of corridor vanished beneath cascading torrents as they scrambled past, stone cracked, spraying shards. The air tasted of salt and mud and fear. They reached a heavy iron gate, the one Drake had been dragged through countless times on the way to interrogation. Beyond it lay another stair, and above that, the world. Locked, Ren swore, patting frantically at his belt. No, no, I had that key. Sarah pushed past him, pressing her palm to the lock. Her eyes slid half shut. Drake felt a faint tingle of Nexu in the air, like static before lightning. Threads of pale blue light, water aligned, spun briefly around her fingers, then seeped into the iron. Come on, she hissed through her teeth. Come on, you stubborn bastard. The lock gave with a shriek, metal twisting, as if in a slow-motion crush. The gate sagged. Nice trick, Drake breathed. Later, they burst into the upper levels now as the prison truly began to fall. The tidal wave that had smashed through the north wall had not been content to leave it at that. Smaller surges followed, eating away at the foundations. Whole chunks of stone slid into the sea with bone-deep booms, taking screaming guards with them. They stumbled out into the gray light at the cliffside, blinking against the sudden openness. The world beyond the prison was chaos. The narrow ledge that served as a landing was slick with spray and bodies. Half the narrow steps that wound down to the hidden sea cavern below had been eaten away by the wave. Boats were smashed, some hanging in twisted chunks from their moorings. The sea itself was a frothing monster, hurling itself against the rocks in fury. Thunder, real thunder, this time, rolled overhead. We'll never make it down, Ren said, staring in horror. Then we don't go down, Sarah said, chest heaving. She looked up instead, to where the cliff rose, jagged and steep, to a lip of rock where scrub clung. Drake swallowed. Climb? Unless you sprout wings in the next 30 seconds. The cliff face was slick, uneven, riddled with cracks. To anyone who hadn't spent their childhood scrambling over ship rigging, it would have looked impossible. To Drake, it looked like a mass that didn't move. Can you manage? He asked Ren. The guard stared at him. He swallowed. Eyes blown wide. I'll try. Good. Drake dragged in a breath. His body protested, still battered and half-healed. He ignored it. Follow me. Don't look down. He climbed. Fingers found holds almost by instinct. Toes dug into cracks. His muscles screamed in protest, but he moved anyway, one hand over the other. The sea roared below, hurling spray against his back. Once, a rock came loose beneath his foot and tumbled, vanishing into white foam. He did not fall. His stomach lurched. Sarah climbed beside him, quicker than he expected, her smaller frame slipping into crevices with ease. Ren came slower, grunting. They reached the lip of rock, but he did tumbled over it onto rough grass, gasping. The wind hit Drake's face, cold and clean. The sky above was a mottled gray, clouds racing. Rain needled his skin. The sea stretched out before them, wild and endless. Freedom. The word felt fragile, impossible, precious. Below, the prison shuddered one last time. The central block where Drake had spent so many days in the dark cracked down the middle. The tower above it leaned, groaned, and then collapsed in on itself. Waves surged up to meet it, hungrily swallowing less than a minute and screaming. The only sign it had ever existed was a semi-submerged heap of rubble in a whirlpool where water rushed into what had once been tunnels and corridors. Good riddance, Sarah said hoarsely. Drake stared down at the ruin of the place meant to break him. He pushed slowly to his feet. Not truly. Now what? Ren asked, shivering. The dawn emblem on his once neat coat was half torn, dangling by a few threads. Now, Drake said, tasting the word like new air, we find a ship, a different kind of storm. They stole a fishing boat 2 days later from a village that would never miss it. Drake paid them an information, warning them of dawn supply lines that might come their way, advising them which harbors were safer now that the Western Tropics balance of power was shifting. It felt right to give something back instead of just taking. The boat was small, cranky, and slow, but it floated. Its sail caught the wind. The first time Drake wrapped his hands around a wheel again, he had to close his eyes. The texture of wood beneath his palms, the way the ship moved under him, even this little one, responding to the sea's mood, the way the horizon spread out ahead, wide and unknowable. He opened his eyes. His reflection stared back at him in the metal ring of the ship's bell, older than he remembered, scarred, the lines around his mouth deeper. His eyes, steadier. He'd gone into that prison, a boy wearing a man's rage. He walked out a man wearing his scars with purpose. Ren stood awkwardly near the stern, eyes darting, as if expecting Drake to turn on him at any moment. Sarah sat on a coil of rope, her legs dangling, watching Drake with a sharp, measuring gaze. What now, Reaver? Chase the dawn across the sea all over again? Take them down alone? The old urge flared, familiar, seductive. They took everything from me, Drake said quietly. If they're still out there, if any of them are, they'll do it again to someone else. Doesn't answer the question, she said. He thought of Marla's eyes in that cave, of Jace's quiet words on the Black Gale's deck, of Turn's disappointment, of the men and women who had followed him, not just because they feared the dawn too, but because they believed in him. He had betrayed that belief, not when he'd stolen the first ship, not when he'd decided to fight, but when he'd let his vengeance eclipse their lives. I'm going to find my crew, and he said, if the ones they don't want you back, Sarah tilted her head. If they've moved on, if they hate you. He looked out at the sea, at the line where gray sky met churning water. I'll earn them back, he said. Ren shifted, frowning. Why? After what they did? They turned you over. Drake met his gaze, and before that, I turned them into tools for my anger. If I hadn't, they would never have been desperate enough to make that choice. Ren opened his mouth, closed it. You looked away, with us, shame coloring his cheeks, softer. You don't owe the dawn anything. Not anymore. Ren hesitated. Sarah snorted. Might as well. If you go back, or I'll hang you for drown me in what's left of that pit, he muttered. He looked up at Drake, something like resolve setting in his jaw. I'll come. I know things, routes, names, then we start. Finding the Black Gale proved Drake easier than he'd feared. She'd gone back to the only place that had ever really been home. Tatu looked different when he saw it again. The trees were taller. The beach was the same, but a few new shacks had sprung up along the shore. Children he didn't recognize raced along the sand, shrieking with laughter. Old Lisa sat on a stool near one hut, mending a net with fingers that shook a little more than he remembered. And anchored in the bay, sails furled, hull resting easy in the cradle of the tide, was a ship whose lines he knew as well as his own hands. The Black Gale. Drake's breath hitched. Her hull bore new scars, fresh patches, a replaced strake, a new figurehead carved in the shape of a rearing sea wolf. Her sails were in better repair, dyed a deeper gray. But her shape was unchanged. She was still his storm-born ship. Or she had been. Not yet, Captain, he murmured. Sarah said quietly. Not unless they let me be. He rowed with hands that trembled. Faces appeared at the rail as they approached. Harpoons did too. No one yelled a greeting. No one called his name. The air felt as taut as a held breath. Marla stood among them, a coil of rope at her hip, her hair braided back. Jace was at her shoulder, jaw set. Turn leaned on the rail farther down, his eyes hard to read. They watched him tie off the little boat and climb the Black Gale's ladder. Drake stepped onto the deck as if entering sacred ground. Hi, he said. It was a stupid thing to say. No one laughed. Marla's eyes swept over him, taking in the scars, the prison's lean hardness, the way he stood. Some of the storm left her shoulders. Not all. You're alive, she said. Disappointed? He asked. A flicker of something, regret, relief. He looked at the others, crossed her face, at the way they stood slightly apart, weight balanced, hands near weapons, ready to fight, ready to flee. Before you say anything, he began, you should know, I know what you did, turning me over, I know why. Marla flinched, and I know, Jace's jaw tightened, that you didn't make that choice in a vacuum. I put you in the kind of danger no captain should. I made mistakes, big ones. He drew a breath. I'm not here to demand forgiveness or loyalty. I'm here to say I'm sorry and to ask if I can earn a place on this deck again, not as some storm that drags you where it will, as your captain or your crewmate, or not at all if that's what you choose. Silence. The sea lapped gently at the hull. A gull cried overhead. You nearly got us killed, Jay said abruptly, at Solstice Isle. And before that, you drove us like we were disposable. Yes, Drake said. No deflection. I did. You made the dawn our whole world, Marla whispered. There was nothing else. Only them and your hate. Her eyes glistened. I was tired, Drake. Tired of waiting to die for something that wasn't ours. He swallowed. Then, we find something that is, she huffed a broken laugh. Just like that? No, he met her gaze, steady. Not just like that. It will take time, work, changing how we do everything. He looked around the deck. I don't want to be a storm that only destroys, Marla. I learned that in a very dark place. He told them, not everything, not every lash, every scream, but enough the prison's iron, the way the dawn meant to use him as a symbol of their inevitability, the wave that had shattered stone, the way he'd climbed toward the light bleeding and half broken, and decided that if he ever stood on a deck again, he would be worthy of it. Tern listened with his arms crossed, his lined face unreadable. When Drake finished, the old man sighed. You're still a fool, he said, but maybe a wiser one. A murmur of faint laughter rippled through the crew. You come back here after all that and ask to stand on this deck. That takes something. Tern shook his head. You broke our trust. That doesn't vanish because the sea spat you back out. But you're right, we all made choices. Turning you over wasn't clean or easy. He glanced at Marla, who looked down. We have our own ghosts. He straightened. We take a vote, he said. All hands. If you stay as captain. Or not at all. No half measures. Drake's stomach swooped. They gathered on the deck, more faces than he remembered. New ones, old ones, some missing. Each one had a say. A few spoke up, voices rough with hurt. Some argued for him, remembering the times he'd stood between them and a dawn blade. Others wanted him gone. In the end, the votes were tallied in a silence that roared louder than any wave. By a margin of 3 hands, Drake Howell remained captain of the Black Gale. He exhaled slowly, the breath shuddering. Thank you, he said, voice thick. I won't waste this. You'll prove it, Tern corrected gruffly. Or we'll throw you overboard ourselves. Fair, Drake said. From that day, the Black Gale sailed with a different compass. They still hunted dawn ships, but no longer at any cost. Drake listened more, to his crew, to his own caution, to the sea's subtle warnings. When Tern said a gale felt wrong, he rerouted. When Marla argued that a tip sounded like a trap, he waited seriously. They shifted their targets too. No more chasing rumors into death mazes. Instead, they struck where it mattered. Supply lines feeding dawn operations, slaver vessels doing their dirty work, outposts that terrorized small islands into silence.